disappeared. Last year, 2018, on September 8, the Night of the Disappeared was held for the first time in the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. We are grateful to the museum for hosting our group in 2018, again and again this year. And we are particularly thankful to, with the big help of the advisor to the president, Dr. Clint Curl, and to the president of the Human Rights Museum, John Yam, who was here earlier to see what's unfolding here in one of the wings of the Human Rights Museum. Winnipeg Multicultural Human Rights Forum is a broad organization, was formed to launch education campaigns on human rights issues confronted by the different communities of Winnipeg, both here and in the home fronts. It also asserts people's rights to national independence and self-determination. It also organizes cultural events highlighting the struggles of different communities leading to empowerment. In the future, we are hoping to gather more communities leading to greater awareness on global human rights issues here in the city, in the historic home, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. On this note, we are inviting anyone interested in helping advance the cause of human rights with multiculturalism as a platform in attaining this goal. Human Rights Now, surface the disappeared, stop the tortures, stop the killings, stop the attacks. The people united can never be defeated. Thank you.
Thank you, Levy, for that powerful speech. On your way in, you might have noticed this piece of art right beside me here, and I would like to invite Maggie Haddad up on the stage to tell you about it.
Good evening, everyone. This artwork is called Piece of Peace. Artwork inspired by our dreams, passions, and hopes as Syrian youth refugees in Winnipeg. This artwork has been done by many youth from Kurdish Initiative for Refugee Summer Day Camp 2019, who many of them has been affected by the war, their human rights been violated, and their parents or relatives or friends been missing or disappeared. This artwork has been supervised and led by one of the program coordinator, Ormia Zagros, who's also with us tonight, and he's also a refugee and self-taught artist. Piece of Peace contains many words, names, and symbols in English, Arabic, and Kurmanji that express feelings and raise voices. Louis Rial has been chosen to be the center of this artwork in recognizing him as our father of Manitoba, our new home. All human beings are born equal and free in dignity and right has been written in Arabic to acknowledge our rights in equality and freedom. Please, thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. We will now be going forward with the panel discussions. I would like to apologize beforehand if I say any of the names wrong. I'm trying. And yes, also some of the panelists we don't have the bios for, so you can say it for yourself. Each panelist will have 5 minutes to speak. Representing the First Nations community is Lisa Forbes. And representing the Syrian community is Ayed Saleh. We have the bio for Ayed. He is originally from Syria. He studied pharmacy in Damascus University, and he arrived here as a refugee in Winnipeg. He is also a human rights advocate with special interests in literature, philosophy, and history. Representing the Kurdish community is Kubra Rahimi. Kubra is a Kurdish Canadian lawyer. She lived the first 14 years of her life as a refugee in a refugee camp in Iraq. Since arriving in Canada, Cooper has committed herself to turning her family's struggles into opportunities to be a positive addition to the Winnipeg community. She was selected as one of Manitoba's Future 40 Under 40 in 2018, a celebration of future leaders and changemakers shaping the future of Manitoba. Representing the Chile community is Laura Castillo of Chilean Human Rights Alliance. Representing the Ethiopian community is Abel Makuninti. Representing the Philippines is Carmi Monterd of International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. Representing Colombia is Luisa F. Izadro. And we have the bio for Luisa. She has a vast knowledge on Indigenous studies, armed conflict, transitional justice, and the peace process developed from 2012 to 2016 between the government of Colombia and former guerrilla movement FARC. She has worked as a consultant on human rights for the Attorney General in Colombia and as a researcher at the National Center for Historical Memory. Currently, she works at the Jose Alvier Restrepo Bar Association, assisting in transitional processes and historical memory for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Colombia, and with the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada, supporting the Uncovering Project Common Ground to foster reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous actors in Canada. Representing Albania is Albiana of the Canadian Community of Manitoba. And representing Tamil is Dr. R.C. Ranjan. Dr. Sri Ranjan is a professor in the Department of Biosystems Engineering at the University of Manitoba, teaching and doing research since 1990. He is active in Tamil rights issues and currently chairperson of the National Council of Canadian Tamils. He is also the president of the International Council of Ilian Tamils, which is a collective of Ilian Tamil national councils in 15 countries representing 1.5 million Ilian Tamil diasporas around the world. He has given presentations in Canada, USA, Europe, UNHCR on human rights violations of Tamils by Sri Lanka. These are our panelists. Before we get into it, we will be showing some images that may be a little graphic for some viewers, so just putting that out there. Okay, now we will go on to the panelists. First, we will have Lisa Forbes.
Hello, thank you. So I am a volunteer Amnesty International worker, and I was asked here, I've been asked to speak a couple of times at, thanks, yeah, it seems okay, at this event by Ali Saeed, because he, I know him through Amnesty International. And so I'd like to thank Ali Saeed, the organizing committee, for your human rights work, and in a time of injustice, remembrance and honoring for your family and community members for reaching out in compassion and solidarity to allow time to honor the injustice and loss of Indigenous women in Canada. Sunshine Wood was a 16-year-old girl who arrived in Winnipeg in September 2003 to attend high school. She went missing in Winnipeg 5 months later and has never been found. Her community is Mantosipi Cree Nation, which is 600 kilometers away, nestled in the heart of the boreal forest. There's about 650 people. It has a number of successful businesses and a beautiful lodge. People go there for hunting and fishing, and right now workers are there from away, there to finally build a school. Sunshine's dad says she loved to laugh. Jennifer Ketchaway grew up in Scanlon First Nation, which is several hours northwest of Winnipeg. She went missing on her 18th birthday in 2008. She called her mom that morning, excited about her big day and the celebration her mom was preparing for the party they would have that evening. Jennifer had been traveling with people she knew from Grand Rapids, 400 kilometers from her Portage la Prairie home. The Ketchaways believe that the RCMP mishandled her case from the time she was reported missing. The police told her mom she was probably on a drunk and to give it a week. It took weeks before police took witness statements at the prompting of her parents. RCMP considered her case to be a murder. Her parents have no faith in justice. They only want to find her. And 11 years later, they still go out every day after work with shovels and picks looking for their girl's body. Helen Betty Osborne was murdered in a northern Manitoba town where she had been living for a couple of months, left her small community to go to the pod to attend high school because she wanted to be a nurse. 31 years ago, in 1988, the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry said of her murder that because she was an Aboriginal person, the townspeople considered the murder unimportant. Allegations of racism, neglect, and indifference on the part of the citizens of the town, the police, and of the Attorney General's Department were made. Now, this year, since February 17th, Cynthia Parisian has been missing. She was last seen shopping at a Home Depot store that day. She has children and grandchildren, and there has been no word. You may not remember her name. There has been a couple of police press conferences, but no community-wide sweep searches, no plastering of business windows with missing posters. Murders and suspected foul play disappearances of anyone is a violation of that person's human rights, to be sure. On what basis is there a human rights violation against Canadian Indigenous missing and murdered women and Two-Spirit people collectively? It's not political persecution or from extrajudicial punishment per se, but rather, as acknowledged by the United Nations, Amnesty International, and others, it is the suppression and oppression of a people's right to justice, policing, healthcare, family services, and economic opportunities based on gender and race. We all live within the same colonial systems that founded this country, under which our governments, their systems, services, and our society itself systemically discriminate against and allow injustices against Aboriginal people, women, and Two-Spirit people, citizens who were going about their days and their lives, ordinary people. This year's National Inquiry Report on Missing Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit people has asked us, all Canadians, to act. Some of the ways that we can do that are to learn the true history of Canada and Indigenous history in your local area, learn and celebrate Indigenous people's history, culture, pride, homophobia, and transphobia wherever it occurs, in your home, in your workplace, or in social settings. And finally, thank you for inviting me to speak at this important honoring, and I ask you to please denounce and speak out against violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people, and help hold all governments accountable to act on the inquiry's calls for justice.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. Now we'll go on to Edith's.
Good evening, everybody. And thanks for Lisa for this presentation. We share the same sad stories, actually. So tonight I'm here to talk about a sad story. One of my neighbors went to buy bread for his kids in 2012, sorry, and he didn't return back. till now. So this is the way how people disappear in Syria. This is the way how life simply ends in Syria. Because human life was nothing at the time of war. So tonight I'm here to talk about one of the most sad and worst human crisis. It is the Syrian tragedy. So for those who do not know the greatness of this country, I think most of you have heard about Syria in news. But the thing that most of you may don't know is that Syria is very great and a very great country in history, traditions. So I remember a saying of a French archaeologist named André Barrault. He said, everybody has two homes. So everybody has two homes. The home he or she was born in, and Syria. So, for better understanding what's going on in Syria, just allow me to review quickly the events in Syria. So, first page. So in 2011, a revolution has erupted in a southern province called Daraa, and quickly spread to other provinces over all Syria. So this revolution was peaceful demonstrations against Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, asking him to leave.
Well, you can go into the classroom.
So lately the scene has evolved. To the worst civil war in the 21st century. So this is a prison called Sednaya prison. Sednaya is an area in Damascus where is a holy area for Christian people, and many of Christian messengers has started their message from Sednaya, but Bashar al-Assad turned it to the worst prison in Syria. So this prison, thousands of innocents are still retained there, and many of them was executed even without trial. For statistics, actually I made a lot of search about the accurate number of disappeared people in Syria, but I couldn't reach to the accurate number because the Syrian regime refused to admit that it has any prisoners. But according to the Syrian Observatory of Human Rights, about 104,000 detained persons were killed under torture. And most reports indicate that disappeared persons exceed 2,100, but it's not the accurate number. So I don't know if you heard in the media about Caesar pictures. So Caesar is an officer who worked with the Syrian regime and lately escaped from Syria. And through activists, he documented more than 50,000 pictures belonging to 11,000 prisoners who were executed or killed under torture. So these pictures are known in the media as the Caesar pictures. Actually, at the last moment, I decided to delete these pictures because they are potentially harmful for some people, but for those who are not weak-hearted, they can make a search on Google and find some very, very harmful pictures. So we're still waiting for justice. Thousands of tortured souls, bereaved parents and orphans are waiting the day when they can see criminals in the High Court. to pay the price of their crimes. So there's a lot of things to talk about Syrian crisis, but I was asked to focus on detained or disappeared people. So that's everything I can provide now, and thank you for listening.
Good evening, everyone. I think she introduced me, so I don't need to introduce myself. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm assuming that either all of you or most of you know who Kurdish people are. You probably know some of the history, but I'll just say a few words about that. So Kurds are of Indo-European origin. We have a distinct culture and languages and many dialects if you look at the different parts of Kurdistan. And obviously the four countries that we come from, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria, are all in the Middle East, or maybe Turkey's in Europe, I don't know. I think there's a lot to talk about, but I think what I'll focus on is just the situation in Turkey and also in Iran. Iran mostly because that's the area that my family's from and that I am more familiar with. I'm also definitely not an expert in human rights issues in the area, but I think it's just from knowledge I've gathered, and I don't know, since we've been in Canada for the past 18 years. So when you look at the situation in Turkey, I know some Kurds may not find this to be true, but from my perspective, the situation of the Kurds in Turkey, I think, is the worst. So their history doesn't start with World War I, but that's kind of, we can't talk about everything. So after World War I, there was a treaty called the Treaty of Sevres that was supposed to give the Kurds in Turkey more autonomy and independence. But then it was not ratified after Turkey, after Britain drew borders and Turkey got its independence, and the Ottoman Empire at that point was defeated. And so this was also the start of Turkish nationalism. And so Ataturk was in power. Nationalism was for the Kurds, it was a huge issue because now the Turks were actually seeing themselves as superior, and they were seeing their society as a homogeneous society, and that there was, and I said earlier that they've had it the worst because they won't even recognize Kurdish people as a people which exist. They say that at that point there was a 1924 mandate which forbade Kurdish schools, organizations, publications, and they even forbid the words Kurd and Kurdistan. And there's something that Ataturk said, that there's no such thing as a Kurd. You are all mountain Turks. You're just Turks living in the mountains. And so those ideas of ultra-nationalism, maybe even I would say goes into fascism, has continued to exist in Turkey. And so I think what a lot of people don't understand is that everyone wonders, why are the Kurds fighting? And I think it's really important to kind of go back to World War I and understand what was happening after the war. And so because of this ultra-nationalism, every time there is any talk about Kurdish rights to language and culture and land and just, you know, security, the state then crushes all of those voices. And so there's been many disappearances. There's many examples in the last, 75 years or so that we can talk about. of imprisonment of Kurdish journalists and students and politicians and activists. And it's not really a problem with the current government in Turkey. Like, previous governments have done very similar things to Kurdish people. And as I said earlier, the situation with Kurdish people in Iran, there may be a tiny bit more sort of cultural freedom in Iran. Like, you can say I'm Kurdish, but in what context? You have to say you're Kurdish Iranian. There's no such thing as you're Kurdish and that's it. Your loyalty has to be to the government and to the country as a whole. And so when they had a revolution in 1979 and the Islamic regime took power, their leader, Ruhollah Khomeini, actually declared full-on war on Kurdish people in Iran. And so, like, this was not just like military, but it was like even the citizens, like, you have the sort of, as if like you have permission from God, you can go and kill these people and you may enter heaven. And so some of the charges that Kurdish people face in Iran, and so I think like the government in Iran is no good to its own citizens, whether they're Kurdish or Persian or many other ethnicities and different faith groups that live in Iran. But I think they are particularly harsh with Kurdish people and Yarsani and Baha'i. There's many other ethnic groups that they are very harsh with. Some of those charges that the Kurdish people that are charged with are national security related crimes like spreading propaganda against the political system, gathering and colluding against national security, and some of those are like corruption on earth and enmity against God. So you're committing a crime against God. And so as you know, in Iran, their capital punishment exists. There are like hundreds and hundreds. If you go through the different provinces, there's hundreds of Kurdish people that are in prison because they wrote some article that said you should give Kurdish people more rights, or that said we should have more more politicians in your political system, and the list goes on. And so Kurds make up only 10% of Iran's population, but those who are executed make up 29%. And so that's a huge number. Out of the 253 individuals who were executed in 2018, 75 of them were Kurds. And I just want to touch on, before I finish, recent events in Iran, which you might have heard of. So there was a hike in fuel prices and of food, which has been going on for the past couple of years. And there was large protest throughout Iranian provinces, including the Kurdish areas. But the crackdown on the Kurdish protesters was much harsher than in other cities. Because, again, they're afraid that this is not just about fuel. This is about, they're doing this against the government, and they want change, and they want their own autonomy, and so they make up all these things to crack down on Kurdish protesters. Amnesty International confirms that there were 143 protesters that were killed. This is in the Kurdish areas, and that number is likely much higher. Over 1,000 people have been detained just in these protests. And the thing is, families are not able to just go and get information about what's happening to their loved ones, or to talk to them, or to see them. There's no transparency. The trials are not always fair. Defense lawyers don't always get all the information that they should be getting. And so, I have family who live in Iran, and I know how bad the situation has been recently. There was a young woman who all she did was write a few articles talking about the protests, and she's been detained. And the family and she's detained since November. The family don't even know what's happening to her. And that's one of thousands of cases in the past many years. And it keeps getting worse because I think every time the government is threatened by people protesting, they become more and more harsh. They use harsher penalty and imprisonment and executions. And so before I end it there, I just want to say that how grateful I am that I was invited here. I don't want to go on for too long. I really just want to hear from everybody else. But I also want to commend the organizers. I think this is really amazing. For a lot of us, sometimes we kind of start to lose hope because we hear so many negative stories coming from back home. But unfortunately, it's not just my country or your country. It's so many countries in the world where we are dealing, and even here in Canada, as we heard from Lisa. So getting together like this and sharing with each other is really, really important. Thank you.
Listen, someone's doing the thing. I have to record.
Yeah. We'll go on to the next speaker now.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Laura Castillo, or Laura Castillo in English. And I am the coordinator for the Chile-Canada Human Rights Alliance. I would like to thank you all for the invitation to have us here, as it is a privilege to have the opportunity to be here tonight as a representative of our people in Chile, and my fellow community members in Winnipeg as well. Today, I would like to start my presentation with a story. This is a love story between Amanda and Manuel. He worked long hours at a factory. Every day, Amanda would run to the factory and visit him during his 5-minute breaks. She would then return home, and there was nothing that could overshadow the smile that expressed the happiness she was left with during those 5 minutes. One day, Manuel and some other men were taken, and in 5 minutes, Amanda's life was destroyed. Manuel never returned, neither did many other men. These lyrics are from one of our most famous folk singers in Chile. And he is present right now on the screen. His songs became the representation of what people went through during the time of Augusto Pinochet's military dictatorship. His name was Victor Jara. He was one of our first detained, tortured, and murdered. Today, I speak to you as the voice of Amanda and Manuel. As I read through my presentation, I hope you will be able to envision the voices of those who have been silenced and who are no longer with us, and of those who are currently suffering human rights violations.
This is the most important one. They're all important.
I'd like to begin, first of all, with a quote. And this quote is from Gregory, I can't see. Gregory Santayana. Thank you very much. Now, however, this quote has actually been used many times throughout history. And it says that without knowledge, those who cannot remember the past cannot, much better, thank you. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Now, this is very true. And I put this quote on here for a reason. The reason is that our story does not begin now. Our reason begins many, many years ago. And this begins throughout history, since the colonialism back in when the Spaniards came to South America. But I'm going to just move forward, and I'm going to start my story at a pivotal time. And that time starts on September 11th, 1973. The armed forces on this day overthrew the Popular Unity Coalition. Let's go. In a particularly violent coup, even for modern Latin America. President Allende died defiant in the burning Moneda Palace. United Nations sources estimate that thousands of his supporters were killed. A minority died fighting against clearly impossible odds. Others were publicly shot without trial. To create mass terror in the factories, slums, and rural communities sympathetic to the Popular Unity Coalition. Many are known to have died under torture. Thousands of people disappeared. Thousands more were herded into gulls and concentration camps. The military, under General Augusto Pinochet, adopted a clearly fascist position. It suspended all human rights, banned political parties and trade unions, burned the electoral register, and swore to eliminate Marxism and reestablish Western values. Now, these Western values, we may add, are not necessarily Western, they're more North American. During this time, 40,000 people died or were disappeared. To this day, there are still 1,201 people disappeared in Chile at the moment. We have no idea where they are. Maybe in volcanoes, maybe buried in the desert, maybe hidden in caves. We don't know. The end of Pinochet's dictatorship brought the hope that there would be equality and that people would be treated with dignity and with great pride. They emphasized their motto of happiness is on its way. The new government and the few that followed stated that there needed to be a transitional phase that would allow the newly elected democratic government to develop new laws and agreements that would boost the economy and in turn ensure a life of dignity for everyone. 30 years transitioned between the end of the dictatorship until now. In these 30 years, each democratically elected government and each one of its presidents, as you can see above, have been unable to deliver their promises of equality, respect, and dignity. In 30 years, people have lived under an oligarchical government that supports a classist system in which the separation between the rich and the poor is clearly marked. The corruption and bureaucracy between the rich and poor is, clearly marked. The corruption and bureaucracy within the government permits large-scale thefts and misuse of government funds for their own personal benefits at the eyes of the whole country. It has been 30 years that our First Nations, Mapuche people, are being labeled terrorists for standing up against the government and not allowing them to expropriate their lands, for trying to sell their harvest in the city streets to sustain themselves and their families. It has been 30 years of discrimination and having to fight for their lives to maintain their traditions, their beliefs, and fighting to be treated with dignity. 30 years of having to mourn their dead. In these last 30 years, the government has sold most of its natural resources to private investors. Chile's main roads and highways are owned by a Spanish company and requires everyone to pay a tariff when used. Education and financial services are in hands of wealthy corporations and are located in the upper-class neighborhoods of the capital city. In these last 30 years, a new generation has risen stronger and braver than ever. They are not gripped with fear of being tortured or killed. And this is because at this point, they have absolutely nothing to lose. The current political situation unfolded on October 17, 2019, with a 30 peso hike in transit fare. Students raided the subway, sparking a countrywide protest in solidarity from the masses. The media portrayed this as an exaggeration of the people, as it was only 30 pesos, something like 40 cents in Canada. But the truth is that the situation had been fueling for these past 30 years. The Chilean people have decided to stand up against all of these inequities and are asking for basic rights. The response from Sebastián Piñera, the president of Chile, has been to declare war on the people who are protesting and has called a state of emergency, allowed the armed forces to take to the streets and enforce police brutality that has affected over 11,000 people. According to the National Institute of Human Rights in Chile, since the beginning of the protest, there have been 3,449 people injured, including children and teenagers, 352 people who have suffered severe ocular lesions, including vision loss, 8,466 people detained, 1,000 children, teens, of these have been teens and children, many of which have been tortured or sexually assaulted. Over 30 people have been missing or murdered, and these numbers are on the rise. The Chilean Red Cross volunteers have been consistently working on the streets, helping the injured. Unfortunately, they have also been the target of the police. They are attacked with tear gas, water tanks, and if they're caught, their first aid materials are taken and burned or thrown out. Amnesty International has made a formal declaration and denounced severe human rights violations, but the government has rejected their report and questioned the legitimacy of this organization. So to this day, our numbers of disappeared and missing are on the rise. Our tortured numbers are on the rise. And I'd like to leave you now with these last few words. We can move on to the next one. And it is also a quote. And this quote is very important because it's in the United Nations Human Rights Declaration. And it is the first article. And it states, all humans are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. So, as you leave here tonight and as we listen to all of these stories, I want to just encourage you to stand up, raise your voice, stand up against human rights violations, because we can make a difference. You creating awareness amongst our community in Canada may mean that we will be able to save a life, save an eye, or just save a lot of pain. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Before we move on to our next speaker, I would just like to remind our panelists that you have 5 minutes to speak, as we'd like to stick to the schedule as much as possible.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'd like to appreciate all organizers who have been behind this incredible event, and thank you so much again. So my name is Edo. I'm from Ethiopia. I just came here in Canada like 6 months back. I'm here today in support of victims of torture. Very good boy. A poignant reminder for everyone, not only of the physical and emotional torture scale, but also the lack of justice and redress, knowing that abusers walk free. I'm here not to share, I'm here not sharing you the history, but rather I'm here to share you my experience and experience of people that I know. Before starting to tell you about the particular story, I would like to give you a glimpse about Ethiopia. So the current sitting government came into power after an unexpected resignation of the previous administration in April 2018. Since then, the political reforms that the current sitting government promised were met with much hope and optimism. But after a while, because of the weak security system that the government now we have, since the sitting government came into power, like 30 churches have been violently attacked, and more than half of were razed to the ground, and approximately 45 clergies and church members have also been killed. This is mainly results from the muted and the weak the government system now we are following. Within the 3 days of protesters went on the streets, on October 23rd, 2019, around 84 civilians brutally killed in Ethiopia. Following this response, the Prime Minister seemed to be muted again. Rather, he tried to guard the person who in charge behind this. Now, I'm trying to share to you one particular story that just happened 3 days ago, after I don't know how many of you know about it, but after the Nobel Peace Prize of our Prime Minister accused of the civilians murder and torture. This story that I found is from the Norwegian journalist who went in Ethiopia as if he is a tourist man, and he brought a very touchy and incredible evidences. So the journalist said he interviewed a couple of civilians. So it says, accordingly, it says, one tortured person said, this torture is happening by the government military people, and he said they hung us upside down with rope around our feet, forced our legs apart, and beat us with rivers. Then we had to sit down in the sun all day and with nothing to drink. And he says he had a leg, and he says they hung me naked with his feet, beaten on the torture testicles with rebels, and testicles cracked. The torture continued. These are our enemies, and they want us to destroy. They came to destroy us, and the man says he doesn't have any respect to the 2019 Global Peace Prize laureate, and the government has several years forced the tribes to leave large areas, and they used to farm, and pasture land has instead plantation and factories. They have their own reason to do that. But there is two tribes now. The Budi and Mursi people have traditionally been armed in order to protect themselves. But according to the French news agency, around 40 members of the Budi tribe have been now killed by the government forces. So this media reports that the report is denied by the federal government, and now currently the time is up now. I think if you have any questions after the panel discussions, we can entertain it with evidences. Thank you so much for that.
Hello, okay. be here, but I'm filling up for Levy. So the good guy over there. So I'm representing the Philippines, and I'm here. I should be invigilating in the university. I came here as a postgraduate student in math. So as you can see, my presentation, it's Beamer, it's not PowerPoint. We don't use that. So, all right. So I'm Hermie Monterde. I'm representing. Sorry for the technical issue. The person. I'm representing Migrante Manitoba and International Coalition of Human Rights for Human Rights in the Philippines. All right. So the disappeared, we call it in general as desaparecidos in the Philippines. I think it's a borrowed term from Spanish, but I'm not really sure. So for the first slide, sorry for the formal definition here, but just in case we're, on the different page, we're defining what the disappeared is. This is the definition from the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. So for the statistics in the Philippines has a long history of human rights violations. So you have here the past regimes of the Philippine presidents, and then you have there the number of disappearances. So the most notable there are during the regimes of Ferdinand Marcos and Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. They are, so if you see this is a metric of how fascist a government is, then yeah, you can take it as that. So yeah, Ferdinand Marcos and Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, you have a lot of human rights violations in there for enforced disappearances. So for the martial law, I'll just give you a few desaparecido here. If you have here Hermon Lagman and John Kimpo, both of them disappeared in 1977. Hermon Lagman, what's interesting about him is that he is a lawyer. He's actually called a people's lawyer. He served as legal counsel for labor unions during that time. So in a way, he has the power to organize. That's why the government tried to get rid of him. And and John Kimpo, this young guy over here, is just a freshman college student who's active in student activism. He was first arrested when he was a freshman, and he was tortured for 5 months, and then he was freed. So he went, he had some post-stress from all of this what happened, and then he went back to university. And after 4 years, after 4 years after he was first arrested, he disappeared. And here are two women from my university back in the Philippines. They fight for peasant rights there, and in 2006 they were abducted by military men. What's interesting about the situation of Karen and Sherlyn was that the perpetrator, the former ex-Major General Jovito Palparan, was actually convicted of kidnapping of these two women. All of them, they were never found. So let's all tie this in. So as of 2016, the UN Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances had under consideration of 44,000 cases of enforced disappearances in 91 states. And as of May 2019, the same organization reviewed 425 cases from 36 countries in those countries mentioned in there. So the moral of the story here is, basically enforced disappearance is a global phenomenon. Can agree with that. And it's a systematic and organized attack on human rights and human rights defenders. And that it's a tool used by fascist regimes to spread terror and silence the dissenters. So tonight, in the Night of the Disappeared, Migrante Manitoba and ICHRP stand in solidarity with all the victims of enforced disappearances as well as incarcerations and extrajudicial killings. Thank you for listening.
Gotta close the door.
No, I got it. I saw the baby at the same time. Hello. Perfect. Great.
Good evening, everyone.
You guys are in?
First of all, I'd like to
You guys in?
say thank you for doing this event, and thank you to the CMHR people and the people who made this event possible. Beforehand, I would like to apologize with the rest of the presentation and with the audience. If I take more than 5 minutes, that's why I am apologizing. But sometimes I think that we need more time to share the information we have lived in our countries. So this is mainly the content of my presentation here. I'm gonna give you a brief review of where is Colombia, some context, some cases, the current situation, and what has been done in Colombia. So, Colombia is a country located in the northern part of South America. This country has 94 cities and 1,200 municipalities distributed among 32 departments. Departments for us means provinces. Recently, the National Center for Historical Memory demonstrated that 63.6% of the enforced disappearances are concentrated in 135 municipalities. During more than 50 years, Colombia has faced a protracted armed conflict between several guerrilla movements and the government, of course. And in 2006, I'm in 2006, I'm not good at numbers right now, but in 2006, there was a short peace agreement between paramilitary groups and the government. And as part of this, the agreement has a law that is a transitional law, like Law 975. And this one created different transitional institutions. This one is the National Center for Historical Memory, and that's why I'm giving that a grade. So this institution has tried to explain the beginning of the armed conflict through historical memory and its pedagogy. Recently, the National Center for Historical Memory again demonstrated that 63.6% of the enforced disappearances are concentrated in 135 municipalities, as you can see there in the map. So they are mainly concentrated on the previous one. They are mainly concentrated in different parts of the country, and mainly they are concentrated in the Pacific coast. And while this institution has said that in Colombia there are more than 80,000 disappearances, the unit of victims, an institution created also under this law, said that there are 167,000 disappeared. So as you can see, the records are not matching together, and basically also the records show that over 5,000 children between 0 and 17 years old have disappeared. Let's go to the next one. So where are they? As you can see, these are mainly the rates of people who have disappeared in Colombia. So you can see from 1970 to 1995, one person will disappear every 8 hours. But that rate is changing from 1995 to 2015, when one person was disappeared every 2 hours and a half. And right now, one person was disappeared every 8 hours and a half. What is the status of the victim? They were civilians, like they were citizens of Colombia, and sometimes they were combatants, and there is not only 6 cases in which we don't have information. I tried to do like a representation of the graphics. So basically, the youth people are the ones that are more prone to be disappeared. Only we have 1% of people who have disappeared between 0 and 10 years old, and the most likely to go missing are between 10 years old and 30 years old, and then the last are between 30 years old and 50 years old. Next one, please. So is this a gender issue? I put it here in intervention because we don't know. Well, the National Center of Historical Memory has said that in Colombia, are more than 87,000 disappearances. The unit of victims, an institution, again, has said like more or less over 5,000 children have disappeared, but only for 10 disappearances that have happened, only 30% of those are more prone to be women. So the cases. Who is the perpetrator? As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, in Colombia we have a lot of guerrilla movements and paramilitary groups. So basically, the ones that are creating these crimes are basically paramilitary groups that you can see in the green part of the graphic, and then also the guerrilla movements. But also I like to highlight here the responsibility of the state in these disappearances, which is the connection between the state and the paramilitary groups, which is only a 0.8%, and also the blue part is 8% of the disappearances are committed by the state. So what's happening now? Where are they? Only over 1,000 have been found alive, over 8,000 have found dead, over 50,000 are still disappeared, we don't know where are they, and over 11,000, the disappeared is lacking of information. There is not information about the disappeared ones. And also, I'd like also to mention here that in Colombia we don't have a really good institution. I don't know if that is a word. I think we don't have like a really good public policies regarding cemeteries. So imagine the amount of no-name people that we have. So as a context here, I did this graph. So on one hand we have the Winnipeg's Investor Group field, and on the other we have the MTS Center. Where I did that? The Winnipeg's Investors Group field has a seating capacity of 33,500, and the MTS Center has a seating capacity of 16,345. If we compare the statistics that I already gave, it means that this amount of disappearances could fill up the IGF stadium over 5 times, and the MTS Center over 10 times. And finally, what has been done in Colombia? So the aim of this information is not to scare you. Instead, the intent is to make visible what has been done in Colombia about this issue. Before 2000, enforced disappearances was not a crime, and thanks to the law created in 2000, it was finally recognized as a crime. So we have 19 years. As a second point, the Peace and Justice Law obliges the perpetrators to find missing ones in collaboration with the National Commission of the Search of the Disappeared and with the offices of the General Attorney. And as a third point, we already have a peace agreement which was released in 2016. And this point agreed to support the search for the disappeared through transitional institutions such as the ongoing Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the special unit to search for missing individuals in the context of the armed conflict, and the special jurisdiction for peace. And as a final point, there is psychological support, which is really important for the people who have lost their loved ones, who have missed their loved ones. Through these institutions, to over 3,000 families during the whole process, of searching for their missed loved ones have recently support. And right now, the Attorney General of Colombia has recovered 9,000 victims and has set up urgent search mechanisms in which the perpetrators are required to provide support. And my final considerations with this is the issue of enforced disappearances in Colombia is a complicated topic to discuss, particularly because both international and national institutions are not able to reach a common estimated number of the disappeared. And talking about enforced disappearances is an issue that can fill us with figures and a lot of information, but we cannot forget. This is out of respect for the families that seek these loved ones, and in respect to those who have disappeared, we cannot simply turn them into figures. Colombia is making use of many victims' organizations and government institutions to work hand in hand with the Special Justice for Peace. And the most important thing is we must continue acting together and not forget the main reason why we come to the world, and is to act for something to make the world more human. Thank you.
Yes, please, just 5 minutes, and probably we can't take any question because already we're running out of the time.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the organizers, the Multiculturalism Human Rights Forum and the Canadian Institute of Human Rights for allowing me the opportunity to share our experiences with you. I thought I will start out by indicating where we are. As you can see, the island of Sri Lanka is located in the middle of the Indian Ocean. I think Lord Mountbatten, who was during the British time, said, whoever who rules Sri Lanka rules the Indian Ocean. You can see that it is strategically located in the middle of the ocean. All the goods and transport from China to the oil fields and the transport of all the goods to Europe and everything is going through the sea lanes in this area. Because of that, because of the strategic location, there's always fight between the superpowers to hang on to the island in the Indian Ocean. Unfortunately for us, the Tamils who live in Sri Lanka, we are caught in the middle of the geopolitical drama, and we have lost many lives because of that. Now, we have been in the island for over, our history goes back thousands of years, but in 1505, the Portuguese took over the island and ruled for 150 years, followed by the Dutch, who ruled for 150 years. And then the British arrived in 1796 and they ruled for another 150 years. But until 1833, the island was divided into 3 states, and then there were separate countries in the island, even though the island is not that big. If you take 3 Lake Winnipeg and fit it, it'll cover Sri Lanka. That's the size of the island. But there are 22 million people in the island, and about 3.5 million are Tamils in the island, who occupy the north and east of the island. This is the part that is orange, that is the traditional homeland of the Tamil people. And because the southern part is occupied by the Sinhalese language speaking people who are mainly Buddhist. They control the parliament and they have elected their MPs and they control the power. Because of that, they can enact any laws they want, and the army is entirely Sinhalese, and because of that, the Tamils who live there do not have any protection. And we have been suffering this oppression for the last 7 decades, since 1948 when the British left. Now there is torture with impunity. There is no let up. In 2018, Sri Lanka was, for the 7th successive year, the top country of origin for torture survivors, referred to freedom of torture for clinical services in England. So the largest number of disappeared people are in Sri Lanka. Now, Raphael Lemkin said, genocide is the destruction of the national identity of the oppressed group and the imposition of the identity of the oppressor. This is exactly what is happening in Sri Lanka, where the Sinhalese are trying to eradicate or eliminate the Tamils, and they have successfully eliminated or at least driven out 1.5 million Tamils out of the island. That is 1 in 3 have fled the island. There are over 400,000 Tamils living in Canada who mainly came as refugees in the last 30 years. Erasing the national identity of the Tamils was done through imposition of the language of the Sinhalese in 1956. 1981, they burned the only cultural treasure of the Tamil people, which contained a lot of artifacts and manuscripts. It was completely destroyed. And they continue to destroy ancient temples and build Buddhist shrines in their sites. And they don't even leave the cemeteries of the soldiers who fought for the freedom of the Tamils. They try to destroy all trace of memory. The mothers and wives of the people who disappeared have been having street side protests, continuous rotation, hunger strikes. Over 146,679 Tamils have been unaccounted for at the end of the war in 2009 May. Nobody knows what happened to them. Even the UN Human Rights Commission seems to give a slap in the wrist to the government of Sri Lanka because of the power of US and Western government, which continue to support this kind of tyrannical regime, mainly as a bulwark against China's influence in the Indian Ocean. So as I said, we are caught in the middle of a geopolitical fight, and we are the pawns of that fight that's happening there. Genocide is killing the members of the group. Indiscriminate killing of Tamils has continued every every decade or so. It used to happen. 1958, my family suffered, they lost their home. 1961, 1977, I was caught in a pogrom. I barely escaped, surrounded by a mob of about 250 people with axes and swords. I managed to escape because I spoke the other language very well to not to identify me. We all look brown. That's one only part that saved me. But if I didn't speak the other language without any accent, I managed to escape. 1983, I left the day before pogrom started, in which 3,000 people were killed. My uncle's house from which I left was destroyed, and they were in a refugee camp. Indiscriminate bombing have taken place in the north and east. In the 2009, at the end of the war, they used cluster bombs and phosphorus bombs on victims. There are clear photographic evidence. No one has done anything about it. Genocide is deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of calculated to bring about physical destruction, whole or in part. They have achieved that. In some sense, they have destroyed the fabric of the Tamil society in the north and east of the island. Driving Tamils out has resulted in 1.5 million, that's about 30% of the Tamil population has escaped the country. Many of them are in refugee camps all over the world. Many of the Western governments accepted, largest numbers were accepted by Canada. The largest diaspora of Tamils live in Canada, Australia, and also in England, but Canada has by far the largest number. The government uses the Prevention of Terrorism Act to arrest anybody they want and torture and maybe disappear them. In 1995, my parents were living in the north. Overnight, Monday, October 30th, 1995, 500,000 Tamils were asked to leave their home and move into the jungle because the Sri Lankan army was advancing. Again in 2008 and 2009, the same people were herded into no-fire zones and massacred by multi-barrel rocket launchers. Nothing is happening. Most of the people who disappeared, we have no idea what happened to them. We only know the numbers of disappeared mainly because when they were in a peace accord time, there were records maintained. But when the war ended, the government took over control of the people. We only have accounting for about 300,000, but originally there were more than 460,000 people. Surveillance continues on. Intimidation of people who are protesting. These are army men in plain clothes, taking photographs of the people who are protesting. People are abducted in white vans, and the bodies are thrown into lakes containing crocodiles. That's what's recently revealed by one of the drivers who felt remorse, and he came out and said, and he pinpointedly said who is responsible for that, and that person was elected with the majority as the president of Sri Lanka last month. This is the situation right now. Based on the evidence presented into what happened to the Tamils, the Permanent People's Tribunal had two tribunals in Bremen, Germany, and Dublin, Ireland. They conclusively said the Tamils are undergoing genocide in Sri Lanka. You can see this picture doesn't tell you the whole story. There are Buddhist monks, they're supposed to be peace-loving. They are the ones who instigate the violence in Sri Lanka against the Tamils, unfortunately. We have held protests in all over the world. This is the protest that happened in May 18, 2019 in Toronto, in the Albert Campbell Square. I was there at the time. We continue to rally support among governments, and we continue to put pressure on the government to try to contain the government. But if you don't do anything, they will go with impunity and kill most of the people. So our pressure and our gathering here definitely helps. And we will never forget, we will keep on fighting, and we are all in this together. Thank you for your support and solidarity.
Why is there even a baby right now? Why is there a baby?
Maggie, nephew. Oh, my cousin.
Baby. A baby.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Adriana Pugliese. I'm the Vice President of the newest non-for-profit community organization, the Albanian Canadian Community of Manitoba. First, I would like to thank the organizers of the event for hosting us in this sacred space at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. We are so fortunate that we can all come together from different walks of life in a safe space where we can raise awareness for injustice, be the voice for the voiceless, and demand what should be guaranteed, our human rights. Just like all of you, I am here to be the voice for my people, and I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about my background so that you have a better understanding of the people I'm representing. I am ethnic Albanian from Kosovo, which is an Eastern European country in the Balkans. I was born and raised in Kosovo until the age of 13. Due to an ethnic cleansing war which took place between 1998 and 1999, my family and millions of other Albanians were forced out of our own homes, our own country, by the Serbian military forces under Slobodan Milosevic's regime. We found ourselves as refugees in Canada and many other countries around the world. We never wanted to be refugees anywhere, but our human rights were violated by some of the worst crimes that a human being can experience. I stand here as a 34-year-old woman and 20 years after the war, and that name, Slobodan Milosevic, still brings back traumatizing memories of my childhood. I never want to speak of him or the Serbian military, but I must. I must let you all know that so much time has passed since the war, and justice has not been served for millions of Albanians who fled Kosovo to seek safety. Justice has not been served for 13,000 people that have been killed, massacred, buried in mass graves, including 1,230 children. Justice has not been served for many families of 1,653 still missing, and justice has not been served for the 20,000 women that were raped by Serbian military forces. The families of the missing and the victims of sexual violence still live in agony, and for them, the war has not ended yet. We must bring closure for these families, and Serbian military must be held accountable for the heinous crimes they have committed against humanity. They must be punished to the highest extent of law so that we can make an example out of them and send a message to the rest of the criminals that are currently violating human rights. We will not allow criminals to roam free in our societies. There's no room for people like them, and they need to know that in time, they will pay for their crimes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I know that in a 5-minute speech, we can't tell the story of our people the way it deserves to be told. However, I am thankful for these 5 minutes and privileged to be able to share a glimpse of the story of my people for the first time at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. I hope that in the near future you will be able to visit the museum and that there will be an exhibition about Albanian people of Kosovo. And I will work hard to make sure that it happens, because their story deserves to be shared at human rights museums all over the world, not just in Canada. And to all of you here today, I want you to know that the Albanian community stands with you in solidarity. We see you, we recognize your pain, and we echo all of your messages here tonight. Thank you for sharing your stories and the stories of those that could not be here tonight. Faleminderit, which means thank you in Albanian.
No, okay. Yes, I think people need some. Okay.
So thank you to all the panelists for their inspirational stories. And sadly, we don't have time for questions, but we will be moving on to the. Yes?
Helal Muhyiddin.
Pardon? Oh yeah.
Rohingya.
Yeah, the Chilean performance of.
Sit down, performance.
Yeah. Minutes.
It's important. This is your country's dance. That's all. Wait.
let's just have one final check. Okay, then.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, let's just, clap for the panelists that came here and the ones that couldn't make it today. Yes, and thank you, everyone. We will now be going on to the dance.
I would now like to invite Ali Said to introduce the keynote speaker. Is he here, Ali Said? Oh, sorry.
I'm here. I don't know how to express my feeling. I don't know what to say. The person whom I'm going to introduce you, we have been together 38 years ago in prison. Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know my name, I'm Ali Said. I'm the founder of the Night of the Disappeared. I would like to welcome to you to our 15th annual event. It's amazing how much the event has grown. And every year we have more and more communities getting involved and joining us with their powerful stories, testimonies, and ideas. The Winnipeg Human Rights Multicultural Forum was born out of these events, and it has been a powerful community, a powerful human rights community organization, which I'm proud of, part of it. I would like to give thanks to Social Planning of Winnipeg and the Canadian Human Rights Museum, as well as all of you joining us. Today is a special day for me because I'm representing I'm representing my friend and comrade in struggle. We were in the same prison together in Ethiopia. He's one of the bravest and most determined fighters that I have had a pleasure of knowing. I was looking forward to having him here because it has been 38 years since we have seen each other. Unfortunately, his visa process has been delayed, so he won't be here tonight, but we are working hard to have him as a guest in the summer. He's the first recipient of the Survivor Award and has recorded a short video for us, which we will play it.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Amdiashi and I am an Ethiopian. I am honored to be here today and to have the opportunity to speak with all of you. I would like to start my speech by thanking SOC EBP, the Multicultural Forum of Winnipeg, Social Planning Winnipeg, and the Canadian Human Rights Museum. According to Human Rights Declaration, Article 5, no one should be subjected to torture, particularly inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. On the contrary, the Dark regime was known for its human and degrading treatment of the mass which led me to join EPR. And I against the dictatorship. During the fight against the violence, I was captured, was held in the worst prison of Ethiopia, named the Central Investigation Prison. Here, 60 up to 70 prisoners were held in a by forcing. Nobody had room to sleep. We had no choice but to stay standing during the nights. Eventually, I was transferred to the called Chile. Most prisoners were simply executed with no trial. The number disappearances were very high in the last 28 years. The whereabouts of many prisoners are still unknown. For those who have survived the brutal torture and imprisonment, like myself, who live the memories of physical and mental abuse. I wish that others who survived could be here with us, but since they are not, I will accept this recognition on behalf of those who have survived and in the memory of those who have lost their lives. For those who are no longer with us, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights has kept their story alive. The question of human rights is international. It goes beyond borders, religion, or race. It's about humanity and having the freedom to fight for change. Nobody should be tortured and persecuted for expressing their belief for fight for justice. I lost my fingers because I asked for equal pay. I lost my fingers because I fought for emancipation of women. I lost my fingers because I asked land for slavery. I lost my fingers because I asked for democracy and basic human rights. I wear my wounds proudly, knowing I fought and continue to fight for what I believe in. These scars of mine tell stories about millions of people who fight for a better future, a better tomorrow. We continue this fight by connecting our struggles with the international struggles. Without solidarity, we cannot win. Thank you.
Way past his bedtime. Oh wow.
Hello. Hello. When they cut his toes, we were in the same prison. In one night, they took 2 toes because he was asking them about the emancipation of women. The second night, they don't care. They took another toes because he was asking them, he was telling them the basic human right. We didn't commit a crime. This is what happened when we were in prison. To me, thank you.
Thank you for that. It's very powerful and touching.
Hello.
One moment, please.
Sorry,
the technology thing, we got disorganized a little bit. My goal is to call Dr. Clint to give this award on behalf of Amdi, who's not able to show us to be with us, and Noor is going to receive it on his behalf.
You know, when you hear a story like the one we've just heard, it almost defies our capacity to understand the courage, the conviction, and the depth of soul that's required to fight for human rights and pay that kind of price. So I think I speak for all of us when we say we stand in awe of individuals like that around the world. And they are our examples and our inspiration. Noor, on behalf, right, of the gentleman we've just seen, I hope that you would receive this award with our deepest and most profound respect and appreciation for all those who fight for human rights around the world and risk their lives, that everyone could experience equality and liberty and respect for their full human dignity. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Okay, we will be moving forward with the next dancing group. Okay, they're coming here now. They're called the Suriana Dancing Group. Surafel come up.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. That was a beautiful performance and very inspiring, touching stories. I'm here today because my mentor, my father figure, Ali Saeed, invited me to give award to this artist that is in Ethiopia who is using his talent and skills to advocate for peace and equity. I'm honored.
So sorry you feel hurt. We should have made what we were doing
hang on.
clear.
Just stop.
What?
Okay? It's my thing's. It turned back on the stream.